So before we get started, I just want to point out the gallery. We're in the Chase Young Gallery. My friend Kate Kostopoulos, who owns the gallery, regrets that she couldn't be here with us tonight, but she wanted you all to feel very welcome. And there's a piano here, so if there's ever a time you need a venue for a recital, a rehearsal, any sort of event that you have, it's a great space and it's a very affordable rate, so keep it in mind. And hey, come on in. Hey Vanessa, how are you? So if you do need the restroom, it's right around the corner. And just be careful as you walk through because there's lots of art on the floor and you just don't want to kick and destroy someone's masterpiece. That would be bad. So if you value this workshop tonight and other events that BSR puts on, like our auditions, our No Stress Studios, our recital series, and all the other resources, please consider making a donation. We have little QR codes here that you can scan. And also, if you're not already a BSR member, please consider joining and becoming a member. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to come up and talk to me afterwards. And if you have any other questions about BSR, do the same. So I'd love to introduce Adrienne Boris. She recently joined the UIA talent agency team as a talent agent. Before that, it was ADA Artist Management, and there was a recent merger, so it's very exciting. So now you're working for UIA. And you have a special focus on concert, recital, and special projects bookings. And you joined ADA in 2021, is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And prior to that, Adrienne made a career as a stage director and an acting coach, arts administrator, producer. Adrienne's one of these people who makes it happen. So we're all very grateful to Adrienne for all of the things. Yes.
I have a lot of hats. And
yeah, why don't you go ahead and talk about all the
spiel
that you wear?
Yeah, I mean, just basically okay, I'll start just so you guys sort of know where I'm coming from. I don't have an MBA, I'm not like a business person, I'm an arts person. So I started as a singer way back in the day. My parents did community theater, and instead of staying home with a babysitter, I would go and listen to their rehearsals, and I think that's part of how I became a director, because I was once told that to be a director you have to be able to sit and watch something over and over again, and that's what I sort of did in my formative years. And my mother was stage managing this production of Pirates of Penzance, and there was this woman singing Mabel, and this was 5th grade. I'd never heard anything like that sound before. I'd heard a lot of musical theater, and I said, I want to do this. So they made me wait until 7th grade. I studied voice seriously, got into directing in high school. Both times I got into directing, it was not so much about my vision and more about I was part of the community as a performer, and some authority figure left or flaked or went to law school. And they needed somebody to sort of step up and organize things, so I've always described myself as somebody with an instinct to organize. And also, I think a great love for singers, and even when I was a singer, I sort of remember I did this diction program with Nico Castell at the New York Opera Studio, and we were all sort of sitting around in our off time, watching a Bryn Terfel DVD of Figaro, and I just looked around and said, these are my people, this is my tribe. And so although it was eventually determined that I don't have the fine musicianship skills, or speaking skills, to hack it as a professional singer, I value, the fact that I've been able to make a career sort of as a part of the singing experience without singing professionally. So what I do, I say that I do for y'all. And I really admire and respect your craft, and I know how hard it is, both from a tactical craft perspective and also the career, which is getting harder and harder as we navigate post-COVID. But there are also some really exciting new opportunities that are emerging. So I was directing, as Brendan said, for a long time. I still direct when I can, and I love acting coaching and audition coaching. But after I got my master's in directing from Boston University in theater directing, I was freelancing for a long time. Eventually got a day job so that I could eat and pay my bills, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, and it happened to be at Harvard Business School. So I started taking some classes in the extension school and sort of auditing some classes in the MBA program, and sort of around the time the pandemic hit, I was like, I wonder how these two paths could intersect, because I was kind of getting tired of booking travel for professors at Harvard Business School and then, you know, directing until 11 p.m. at night. And people had been telling me for years and years that I should become an agent, and I was like, no, I'm gonna be a director because that's what I went to school for. You know, but I had this weird side hustle, which I think some of you know about, which is writing bios for opera singers because y'all seem to hate writing about yourselves. And it was easy for me with my English degree background and like, you know, a sort of big picture sense of what the career was or how it wanted to look. And I started to get this kind of reputation around Boston. It's also important to say that I live in New York now, but I lived in Boston for 12 years. And I started to get this reputation as like a connector or somebody who is going to put people up for things or recommend people for things, and people would joke like, you should have your own agency, like I'll be your first client, and I was like, well, how would that work? I don't know. So I'll just keep like recommending people for things over email. But then the pandemic hit and we all had that kind of pause, and I had a chance to think about like, okay, what am I really doing in my life? Like, how can I get some forward momentum in sort of one area? You know, I got tired of so much split focus, basically. So I did some informational interviews with some colleagues, Alex Fletcher and Sean Jeffrey, Sean I now work with, who I'd known since my days at Opera Boston. For any of you who may remember Opera Boston way back in the day, that's where I got my start. And they were all like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, because I realized that I wanted, you know, my interest in directing or like arts leadership was more artist focused, and I was more interested in the development of the artist and helping the artists achieve goals and reach new opportunities and get companies connected to the right artists and vice versa. And it was less sort of about like necessarily my vision or what the height of the platform was. Hey, it's Catherine. Hey.
No, come on.
I'm just giving my life spiel, which you know a lot of, so. 15 months later, you know, that was when we all thought things were gonna be shitty for 4 months, and after 15 months I was like, okay, well this is not gonna work, I should just go into arts marketing or something. And then I got a Facebook message from Sean Jeffrey at ADA saying, we'd like to talk to you about the future at ADA, and I said, oh my gosh. So they hired me on part-time in 2021. And this is a lesson to keep using Facebook, even though it's not cool anymore. And kept working at Harvard Business School full-time, so I had a job and a half for about a year. And then they finally hired me on full-time at ADA about a year later, and then 6 months later we merged with UIA Talent because Anna D'Archuleta, who used to run ADA, got the post of National Sawdust Executive Director. So that is how we find ourselves here today, and I find that I'm doing a lot of consultations in New York and sometimes Zoom consultations with folks here as well, just about sort of like what is an agent and how do I get one and how do I keep one, and so I thought I would try to distill all that information. It's the first time I'm really distilling it in like a setting like this, so I have a lot of notes so that I don't forget to tell you anything. But you know, we'll try to keep it fresh. So the first thing I'll say after that is really that my colleague at UIA, Aaron Sanko, says this is a business of opinions, and I agree with him, so I'm saying this is my opinion. This is not definitive. It's, you know, it's certainly been kid tested and mom approved a few times. But you know, it doesn't change the fact that a lot about this business is luck and being in the right place at the right time, and it's also a business of relationships, right? And a lot of this information also kind of assumes that you're at the top spot in your career, or you're at that sort of precipice that we'll talk about a little bit later, where, you know, you're ready for an agent. And so if you're not there, that's totally fine. You just file it away for later, because one of the things that annoys me is that this stuff is not really taught in schools. So we'll start with a little bit about, you know, what is the agent-client relationship, and what's the difference between an agent and a manager, right? So in Hollywood, there are two different people. Like, my cousin is a working actor in Hollywood, and she says that her agent really only signs contracts, and they deal with financial stuff and legalities. And there are so many, you know, that it's like, that's what fills your day, and that's it. And the manager, I think, has a little bit more of the fun job of like dreaming up projects with clients and advising the clients on career moves and connecting the clients with opportunities and all of that. So in the opera / I'm going to say opera, but I mean classical music, but it's easier to say opera. In the opera business, it's the same person. So some of the things that I do on a daily basis, here's a partial list of what I do on a daily basis. So I do negotiate artist contracts. Oh, come on in. I do negotiate artist contracts with companies, provide a lot of career advice and consultation for artists. I send a lot of cold emails on behalf of artists. I know that's why everyone wants an agent, so that somebody else can do their hustling for them. I create press kits and program bios for artists, listen to roster auditions, so auditions of new singers for the roster, or roster singers who might want to come in and like sing new rep that they're batting around. For their team and get advice. I go to a lot of artist performances. I'm going back on the train early tomorrow because I'm going to be seeing something at Carnegie Hall tomorrow night, and I've traveled so far as California to do this, not international so far, but it's really meaningful to the artists when the agent comes to see their show, and it's also useful, if it's a big role debut, we're gonna go see Craig sing Yokanan in Minnesota, even if it costs the whole commission, because it's important to hear what he sounds like doing that live, and also for him to feel supported by his team, and a lot of other duties as assigned. The thing that I love most about it is this idea of, like, I started with sort of talking about being part of the development of the artist without actually having to do the singing, but being a really close part of the exciting parts of their career. I mean, there's plenty of things that are challenging about it, but I remember I had this experience at Jordan Hall going to see Sydney Outlaw, who sang the baritone solos in the Messiah, Bossa Baroque. If any of you heard that, he is my client, and he's freaking incredible. I think it's some of the best singing that I've ever heard, like, live. And so he did Trumpet Shell Sound, which you can find on YouTube. I highly recommend Googling Sydney Outlaw, which is the best baritone name in the world. Sydney Outlaw, Trumpet Shell Sound, Bossa Baroque, him and trumpeter Justin Bland. Really do it up in that aria. And the second it cut off in Jordan Hall, like, all the septuagenarians were like on their feet, like, losing it. And I knew, and I made that opportunity happen because I knew Sydney. I know his voice really well. I know he's really suited to Baroque repertoire, and he's done the Messiah a couple of places that aren't as prestigious as Boston Baroque. I've known Boston Baroque as an organization for a long time because I used to live here. I've known Marty Perlman for a while because I used to assistant direct at Boston Baroque, and so it was kind of this, like, convergence of, like, very considered opportunity cost that paid off, and they were, like, obsessed with him after that and wanted to have him back to record a CD, like the sort of little, like, Bryn Terfel handle CD, except there hasn't been a CD like that by a black artist since Kathy Battle, which was a long time ago. And they hired him back to do the Don Giovanni, which was the next semi-staged opera. So, like, that kind of stuff is really rewarding to me, even though, like, Sydney is the one up there doing the work and I'm sitting in the audience. But, like, it was meaningful for the company, him, and the audience. And that's when you get that trifecta. I think it's really useful. So I think a common misconception about the agent-client relationship, basically, in the marketing materials, we said it's a business and creative partnership, and that's true. So what does that mean? It basically means, I think one big thing that I would want you to take away from this talk is that representation goes both ways, because we think that the singer is, being repped by the agent, and the singer is just sort of doing their thing and, like, irrespective of their role in that relationship. So we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of what the role of the singer is in the singer-client relationship. So you're not being represented kind of in this passive way. It's still your career, your responsibility to book the gigs, be strategic, and sing the right things at the right time. Your manager, of course, is a part of that conversation, just like your teacher or coach is. But it's your career, and you're being evaluated, in some ways, not only by your raw artistic talent in terms of the lens of your manager, but also as a kind of a marketing product. And I hate to use that term, but one of the first things that I learned when I started working part-time at ADA is how often managers think about potential clients based on the ways that they can or can't market them to companies. So if a singer is sort of like, there's nothing wrong with versatility, but if they're kind of like, I do everything and I don't really know what I like to sing the most, if they don't even know what they like to sing the most, if they haven't sort of made some kind of stacked resume history of a role or a certain kind of role or specialization of a certain kind, then it's kind of hard to figure out how to market them in one market or several markets. UIA is, I noticed there was a question that was sent ahead of time about, like, would managers have a problem with somebody who's hyper versatile? Absolutely not. You just have to be really sort of pinpointed and specific in all of those areas that you're saying that you specialize in, at the same time. Because the deal with UIA, if you don't know, is that we're one of the two organizations in New York that also has a film, TV, and Broadway arm. So we're always looking, and I think that's becoming more and more common now for, looking for opera singers that have that kind of triple threat aspect. So there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to sort of, be able to be sold as X in this field and Y in this field and Z in this field. And you're also being evaluated on what the potential revenue that you might bring in is, because it is a financial partnership. So an agent makes their living off of the artists on their roster, and they're not going to necessarily take a chance, depending on where you are in your career and where they are in the history of the firm, they're not necessarily going to have the resources to take a chance on somebody who is really, really green and does not have a lot of demonstrated financial accrual, in the field. And so part of this has to do, right, with your self-awareness as a singer, and do you know how to market yourself to the agent? What are you singing and why? And, how does that kind of line up with how people see you in the field, for better or worse? And one of the biggest things that you want to sort of evaluate about your potential relationship with your manager is whether you two are on the same page about that stuff. And we'll get into that more later, but there's nothing worse than somebody who comes in and says my voice might be really, really good for Don Jose, but I never want to sing it, I hate it. And the manager is like, we really need a Don Jose on the roster, and we're going to be putting you up for that all the time. And so that's not going to go anywhere, and it doesn't matter how good the singer is, or how good the agent is, it's not going to go anywhere. I also usually say that the agent-client relationship is part stage mom, part manager, and part therapist. The stage mom part is really fun. You get to go to all the shows and cheer and take Instagram pictures and whatnot. And the therapist is, sometimes less fun. You get a call, at 11 p.m., freaking out about whatever. But that's good. I'll get into this later, but it's if you have a manager, don't shut them out of the things that are making you happy or the things that are making you sad, because then they won't be able to help you. So how do you know if you're ready for a manager? I think another common misconception is that it's not, or rather, a common assumption is that it seems to be the manager's job to take you from zero to hero, and we can't do that. For some of the reasons that we talked about before, and that it is a financial partnership, so unless your manager happens to be independently wealthy, which some of them are, I'm not, we can't necessarily, there has to be a bit, in every roster there's kind of a balance between really seasoned performers and then new voices, and you have to be able to fit into the right category at the right time, basically. But you want to look for a roster, basically, that is 1 or 2 steps above the career point that you're at, not 10 steps above. There's plenty of firms out there right now that are 10 steps above where all of us are at, and then there are firms that are more realistic in terms of developing yourself. And that's not to say, after you get your first manager, you can't switch. That happens all the time. But in terms of the first look for the roster, you want to try to not shoot too high, so that you can actually get in the door and have a conversation and be taken seriously in that way. So again, business of opinions. These are some instances in which I might say that you're ready for a manager. You have a higher volume of gigs than you can keep up with, basically, and most of them pay $2,000 to $2,500 per gig. So I think probably a lot of us, and myself included as a director, have had too many gigs that we can keep up with, but they don't pay very much. So that's kind of the two things that need to align. Maybe you have a lot of troubling career questions because things are going so fast, and you have somebody in your life like myself and this person for a lot of people who I don't represent, who you often find that you have to look elsewhere for career advice because you're not feeling like you're that probably means that you're jumping into bigger ponds that you're unfamiliar with, and so you need somebody else's outside perspective to be like, should I do gig A or gig B? Because your career seems to be growing at such a rapid rate. And so in terms of this not taking you from zero to hero, it's not just about the money that you're bringing in necessarily, but also what's your reputation in the business, what are your relationships in the business, do our relationships align, do you have some relationships that I might want, and vice versa. So again, you see it's a partnership basically. And do you have some idea of how you might be marketable in the business? What's the niche that you fill that is difficult to find elsewhere or to which your unique talents might speak. So this could be anything from I sing the Queen of the Night really well to being able to learn new music at the drop of the hat. So it can be anything. When you're shopping for management, you want to write a clear and compelling letter or email to the manager stating what you admire about the manager and their roster specifically. So it's just like a job application, like we can tell if it's, you send it out to 40 people. Keep it pretty short, introduce yourself and what drives you as an artist, something about who you are, not just sort of what you want out of this relationship. And you must include video at this point that is recorded after 2021, I would say, or maybe 2022. I cannot stress how important current videos of representative rep are now. People are getting hired off of video, and managers are completely deciding whether they want to hear a singer live off of video. So it's super, super important. And you should have, your resume. I could teach a whole other workshop on like how to do your resume and stuff. But basically, since we're here, I'll just say, again, my opinion, it wants to be one page, it wants to have a non-serif font, you want to have no more than 4 or 5, like, teacher coach, the stuff at the bottom, teacher coach, and those should be like one big name if you have it, one smaller name that if I called them would speak like really specifically well about you, and then the other 2 are sort of dealer's choice. And when you're writing to management, you should specifically on your resume highlight upcoming work, because that is what we care the most about. It's so great that you were in this premiere a year and a half ago. That was a big deal, but we want to know what you have coming next, because that's where we come in, literally into the future of your career. So consultations. If you've heard of a consultation with a management company, in my opinion, they're not scams. When I do one, I charge $80 an hour for these consultations, which is why I hear you're getting a deal and you don't have to sing, which is good. But it's a way you pay for them, and it's a way to get in the door to an agency where you're not exactly quite ready yet. So maybe I said look for something that's 2 steps above. So maybe you find something that's 4 or 5 steps above, but you really admire them and want to get on their radar early. That's great. I think it's absolutely worth the $80 or $100 or whatever it costs to go in and sing for them. And it's basically like a mock audition where you actually receive feedback and can actually have a conversation with these managers. And if they're worth their salt, they'll give you some useful advice and sometimes hook you up with maybe lower level managers or different, even if it's not a level thing, if they don't have space on the roster now, but you have some in with them or you caught their attention in some way, they're interested in you in some respect and they're going to help in a way that they can. So I think, although it's always better to be in some way, obviously not to have to pay to go in for an actual audition, if it just depends on what the climate of these rosters is, like who they have and what room they have. If they don't have room, they're happy to hear you for a consultation. So I think it's well worth the money personally. And then it's on you really to keep in touch. Like a lot of these people will say keep in touch, and you really should keep in touch because we have a lot of emails coming at us like every day, and if you don't sort of stay at the top of our inbox, by which I mean like saying hello every 4 to 6 months or every time you have like a big piece of career news, then we'll forget about you. And we actually don't want to forget about you. This is not Wall Street. We want to forge these relationships and see you grow and see you develop. So when we say things, and I'm talking about like good witch agents here, that there are bad apples in every industry, but when we say, thanks so much for coming in, it'd be great to see, how your career develops, like, please keep me apprised, like really do that. And don't feel like you're bothering them, because otherwise, we just won't know. So referring to this idea of that I came up with, courting and being courted, that's not really a thing, it's just how I refer to it, because really the agent-client relationship is a lot like dating. Some of you maybe have never had to date, but like for those of us that have, there's just a lot of parallels. So it's like looking for a relationship, and the first rule of thumb is kind of a sad one, but anybody who's like beating down your door and like Facebook messaging you and like begging you to join their roster, you probably don't want. There wants to be some kind of getting to know you process, because that's how trust is established, and that's how you can figure out how they work, and that's how they can figure out how you work. So you really want to do your research on any of these people that are sort of beating down your door and trying to get you in on the ground floor. A lot of times when people will start a new agency, they maybe are a former singer or a former practitioner of some kind, and so they're going to trusted friends to sort of start that sort of first 12 people on the roster. But if this is somebody that you've never heard of, yeah, just do your research on them. Because I think that any firm that's worth its salt is going to want to do their research on you also and get to know you. So this courtship process should probably be about 3 to 6 months and sometimes more. And this can come out of either a paid consultation or an audition. There's no really sort of hard rule on like which one leads to this kind of informal relationship. Again, it's kind of all about timing and what people are looking for on their rosters. But this unofficial management thing, like I think sometimes people get huffy about it, but I want to nip that in the bud because it's really just an insurance policy of like, how do we work together? You know, it's literally dating before getting married. Like, how do we work together? You know, you did this one audition for me and it was great, but how do you perform? What do companies say about you? What do you think about yourself? What do I think about you? What's your communication style like? These are all things that are sort of being evaluated during that courtship process. And you should both be clear, just like in dating, whether it's an exclusive relationship, because I've seen singers get in trouble. This happened really recently where like my boss, Vanessa Uzan, was like, saw some artist at a young artist program and was like, I think you're great, let's get to know each other, I want to start putting you up for stuff informally. And she had said, you know, in writing that this is, you know, if we do this, it's going to be for 3 months and it's going to be exclusive. And she found out that the singer was being put up for stuff by other managers and it makes her look really bad. And the companies don't like it because they like to know who to go to about a certain artist. So, you know, you should be clear about that and be respectful of the manager that's sort of sticking their neck out for you, basically. Usually it is exclusive. So in this courtship phase, some things that a manager might be investigating about you. We've talked about some of these things already, but what do you have coming up? You know, what's next is always the big question. What are your major relationships in the business? Are these folks that they also have good relationships with? Are there new relationships that you can bring them and vice versa? What are you singing now? Like, how old are you? Because that's important in terms of the development of the voice. And what are you singing now? Where do you see the voice going, and where do they see the voice going? And that's something that you should be. I'll get into what you should be evaluating about them also. But like, you should be on the same page about that. So, what are your goals? And do you get along as people? I mean, at ATA, we always have the rule like you have to want to have a beer with them because none of us is making enough money to like, you know, put up with pills. You know, it's a business of relationships and we want to work for and advocate for people that we like, and vice versa. And that's part of how trust is established too. Like, if you like someone and feel like they get you, you know, you're gonna feel more at ease. And also, any manager should want to hear you live first. Video is great as a way to get in the door, but I would not sign with anyone that has not heard you live. And then things that you want to be evaluating in your potential manager, who is on their roster, and do they have the level of the career that is basically 2 steps or so above yours? It should not be 15 steps up. Who do they have on the roster singing your rep? Because at UIA we happen to now, because of the merger, we now represent the top 2 queens of the night, at least in America, and probably in the world. We have the woman who's singing it at the Met in the new production, and also the woman who's covering that woman. So if I sing the Queen of the Night, probably would not be busting down UIA's door, because that's going to be a waste of time. So I'm going to approach another agency. So I think that's one thing that a lot of singers really underestimate, is that it's not personal if a manager, you know, evaluates your package. If you've done your job and, you know, adequately and honestly represent yourself, and they say, you know, we just don't have space for somebody in your repertoire right now, that is the truth. And they're not going to take you on because they're already having enough trouble getting work for the people that they've already committed to. Whereas sometimes it'll be Kismet, and they'll say, oh my gosh, we really need, you know, an Italian at bass, and here you are, and this is great. So it can seem, it's like frustrating, because it's like, oh, why was it so easy for that guy? Because of the timing and the firms that he happened to approach. So it's not personal, but it can be frustrating. Yeah, and so you should have frank discussions of like, what do you think of my singing now? What do you think of the voice now? What is it? Am I doing the right things? Am I singing the right things? And where do you see it going? Because you don't want to be with someone necessarily that's going to push you in the wrong direction. Yeah, and is there a rapport as people, and could be trust be established in the future? And feel free to talk to other singers on the roster, but know that a roster is a lot like grad school, right? Like I'm sure you all know that people have varied experiences at grad school. Like I went to BU, not the School of Music, but the School of Theater, and you could talk to 37 people who went there, and they all had different experiences. So, and so I think, to distill it, I think when you're shopping around, those are the two biggest things, is like, am I barking up the wrong tree with my rep because they already have a billion people that sing my rep? And also, is it at the right level for me, and does this person seem shifty and untrustworthy? Like, sometimes it's easy for us to sit here, in a pressureless environment and say like, yeah, of course I would never sign with someone that's not trustworthy, but like when you get a little starry-eyed and feel flattered, that someone wants to represent you, it's easy. So you want to sort of really take a step back and try to evaluate the person just like as a human. All right, so once you have management, a little bit about what they should be doing for you and should not be doing for you. So ideally they should practice proactive management, which basically just means that they're not sitting at their computer all day waiting for inquiries to come in about you, but in fact they are sending cold emails, they're reaching out to companies, they're doing research for you, ways to advance your career. Keep in mind they have like 45 clients, so they're not going to spend 5 hours on you every day, but ideally, I have like a rotating schedule, and it's not as precise as it probably really should be, and to work on that over the summer, but like I can only send so many cold emails to symphony orchestras before they start deleting my emails, but I try to send, at least one every other week about, 2 to 4 artists specifically. Like I sent one for Sidney and his Messiah because I had that video, and it's great, and I was like, it's gonna be a crime if we don't get him another Messiah this season. So they should be proactive, and sort of always thinking ahead, and when they, it could be anything from sending cold emails to when they're hearing a company comes to them about another artist, is so-and-so free to sing Tosca and Tosca, you say, do you need a Scarpia? Because I have this Scarpia. They should be consulting with you on rep and career choices, obviously, that goes without saying. Suggest and promote you for appropriate roles that come across their desk that you're the right fit for, and they should not be keeping any opportunities from you that come in through them if they don't think that it's the right fit. It's still your career, so you could be like, this person is crazy, but hey, this inquiry came in for you. I don't think you should do it. Here's why. Still the artist's decision. They should keep your materials up to date and send them for program bios. Usually that's like an associate's job, but I do a lot of the bio writing for singers in terms of the big press kit bios, and then my associate will condense them for programs. And that includes measurements too. I was dealing with a singer who has a manager who shall not be named, and I was like, as the director, and I was like, we need your measurements, should I contact them? And they were like, no, they don't have them. That's not cool. They should have your measurements and be able to help production teams, get what they need quickly. And they should service your contracts, which is another big associate manager job, which means travel, housing, logistics, company management, all that stuff, making sure you know where you're going when you're going there. And it can be harder than it would seem to get this information out of companies sometimes, particularly symphony orchestras. I find sometimes they don't produce as much as opera companies do, so you really have to be, again, proactive. I see that there's this gig coming up in 90 days, what's the plan? Are you reimbursing travel? Should they book the flight themselves, etc. Sometimes I've helped singers investigate travel options, which is not that different from what I used to do at Harvard Business School, so they should do that. Sometimes they can invite other industry people to big opportunities for you, so not every time, but we had a singer who was spends most of his time in London, but he's from Minnesota, and he premiered, he starred as Ronaldo and Ronaldo at Minnesota Opera, and that was one where we wanted to invite all of the early music groups in Minnesota too. they should be seeing your shows, not every show, keep in mind they have like 45 to 90 clients, but particularly if, say you're in Boston or you're in New York and the production is there, somebody from the team should make an effort to go. They should be promoting you on social media, not running your social media account, but through the agency account saying, so-and-so is performing this tonight, so you can share it. And they should respond ideally to all inquiries, but at least your inquiries, like when you email them, hey, can we look in, I saw this press release, I got today, somebody, I saw Ricky Ian Gordon is doing Grapes of Wrath at Carnegie in 2024 in some concert, can we try to get me in front of the people who are casting that? I have no idea how to do that, but I'll figure it out. But I responded and said, absolutely, I'll look into it, so that he knows that I'm on it. And also, ideally, they should be responding to companies within 24 to 48 hours as well, because that's kind of like a big value add of having an agent, or right while you're at rehearsal, like I'm sitting at my desk and responding things for you. I received this and I'm working on it. I think that's important. The big thing that they should not do is force you to take any particular gig or withhold opportunities from you. And it sounds obvious, but that does happen. They should not be your entire public relations team. There are actually other PR firms that specialize in singer PR. Katie Solomon in New York is one of them. And that, when I say PR, it's not just marketing, but like pretty much anything that's like raising your national profile through news coverage is really not the agent's job. And they really you shouldn't think of them as being on call for you necessarily. Remember that, your work week probably looks a lot different than theirs, because like rehearsals be rehearsals and sometimes they go until 10 or 11 p.m., but trying, unless it's an emergency, to communicate during business hours is helpful. So how is trust built? It's really built in the same way that trust is built in a lot of different kinds of relationships, right? So through communication, mutual respect, giving the benefit of the doubt, and having this attitude of mutual support. Basically, I usually say about a lot of things, drink the Kool-Aid or it's not gonna work. So like if you sign with an agency, like give yourself a year and go for it, and don't sort of constantly be like picking at them, and vice versa. Again, ways that the term representative goes both ways. Another thing I think that singers don't think about a lot is that although, we call a roster a family, a lot of things are called family that aren't families, but the big part about that is that, you're all on the same website, and the company goes and, selects singers from the same roster, and when you're out on a gig, you're actually representing not only your agent manager, but you're also representing all the other members of the roster. So if you're a pill and you alienate a company, you might alienate that company on behalf of the artist management firm for all of your colleagues. So that's something I think people don't think about a lot. Another way to build trust is not to take sensitive matters into your own hands if you have a manager. So I referred to this a little bit earlier, but like we've had, singers who've gotten hurt on stage, or, fight intimacy issues or bad company management issues, and then we hear about it 6 days later, and it's like, well, I could have done something about that, but, they didn't want to bother us, or they didn't think it was a big deal, or they didn't think it was our job, or whatever it is, but like that's literally our job, to get on the phone with the company and mediate and try to help before you get so frustrated that you make a big social media post that causes a problem for you, basically. So yeah, real stories, real things. Communicate, it's really important, and if you feel, I know I say, drink the Kool-Aid, whatever, but say it's been a year and a half and you're just kind of feeling like, well, I'm not really sure if we're on the same page anymore, and it's just, it's been a while since I got some opportunities that have been interesting to me, like ask, can we have a 20-minute Zoom meeting and say that and see what's on their mind, and, they may have just been like, I'm so sorry because I have 45 clients, this has slipped through the cracks a little bit, you have to advocate for yourself in that way. Squeaky wheels do get the oil, I will say that, and I think there's nothing wrong with being a squeaky wheel, especially in this business. And remember that agents don't have access, to your personal calendar 100%, like we have access to your performance calendar basically, but there's nothing worse than like, getting a really exciting offer for some time and that looks free in your performance calendar, and then we call you and say, yeah, they want to have you come in, and it's like, oh, it's my cousin's wedding, you should tell us that so that we know. And then, finally, I think both sides should really take real accountability when something goes wrong, and things go wrong all the time, and it means a lot, to hear, this is on me, next time I will, etc. Really engage in the accountability system, and, don't blame each other, but, if each side sort of takes a minute, like I had a bad situation, I mean, it wasn't that bad, but like a company, just sort of Googled one of our artists, and despite my associate asking 100 times whether they needed a headshot and a bio for the program, they just ignored my associate and printed whatever they wanted, which was like a sort of mashed up bio from her personal website, and she is really particular about her bios, and I know that, but I dropped the ball because I was busy and sort of didn't, like, I trusted my associate to like ask, and she did, and it's not really her fault, but it was like a confluence of things where the company was unresponsive, and I didn't take the extra step to know that like this particular client is really particular about her bio, so I should have stepped in and said, like, have they asked for a bio, what's the word count, can I see it? I didn't do that, and so they printed this schlock that she was pretty upset about, so I just took responsibility for my part in that, and we work together on like how can we come up with a system that prevents this in the future, and can you get them the updated bio for the recording that's coming out, and etc. So like if I had just been, and she sent this long email that was like, I know this isn't that important, and you're really busy, and if I have to help more, I will, and it's like, no, that is my job as your manager, and we do drop the ball sometimes because we're human, so that's how to handle it, I think. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about self-management, and I imagine probably there are a lot of questions about that, but the hardest part about self-management is just finding the time to self-promote, and that is a lot of administrative management, because you're already dealing with doing your own bios and things like that while you're dealing with auditions and going to gigs and doing everything yourself. But my advice is to make a big, I would make a big Google sheet of all your contacts in the industry, both academically and professionally, and set up a MailChimp. Many of you probably have, or even if it's not that many contacts, just commit to reaching out personally every 4 to 6 months, or every time you have a big career update. Send things like holiday cards. Remember that networking is not just about you needing something from the other person, but it really is just sort of a slightly more pressurized form of relationship building. I mean, I have many friend leagues, as I call them, who either started as colleagues and became friends, or started as friends and became colleagues. It all gets mushy, and again, this is a business of relationships, and we want to like each other and feel seen by each other. Keep lists. One thing that a manager might do for you is keep a list of what you sang for what company, where and when, like in our database, so you should keep that for yourself. Keep your materials up to date. It's painstaking and annoying, but try to do it like not under the gun of like, I need this 150 word bio by Friday, do it like, make it a summer project for yourself, or Christmas, or whenever you have some downtime, just to update them like every 4 to 6 months or so. Conductor relationships are super important, especially in symphony work. I get a lot of requests from the roster that I have right now, just sort of saying like, gee, it would be great to have more concert work, and I say, yes, I agree, I will hustle for you, but I would say like 85% of concert bookings come through the conductor saying to their artistic administrator, can you ask about X singer, whether they're free, because that's who I want to work with. It's like and I think you've probably found in Boston, I hear that like the oratorio scene is kind of like that as well. Like it can be kind of hard to break in, but once you do and you have those relationships, you start to get asked to do other gigs. Recordings of symphony work are really important, because I find that symphony conductors are they're more literal. So an opera conductor might be able to say like, oh, he sang Scarpia, so he can sing this other thing, he can sing Rigoletto or whatever. But symphony conductors are less likely to be like, he sang Brahms Requiem, so he can sing Fauré Requiem. Like, they want to hear it, especially anybody with like an early music focus, like the Messiah. If you want to be singing Messiahs, have Messiah recordings. For my money, it doesn't have to be a video. It can be a high quality audio with piano for symphony stuff. For opera, of course, it should be video. crashing auditions, a lot of people are nervous about that, and I understand that it's a big time commitment and financial commitment to come to New York, but I'll tell you when the best time to do it is basically, early December, pick a time between Thanksgiving and December 15th, basically, and come for 4 days, come for a week if you can, and do your research on Yap Tracker to see what is being cast, and don't go in for things that are not casting for something that you would be appropriate for. But I will tell you, sickness is a thing, lateness is a thing. I go to a lot of auditions with the artists on behalf of artists, and there's always sitting around time. Sometimes they're behind, but you can get in there if you're persistent enough, and there's nothing wrong with it if you do it, in a respectful way. There's usually, for these bigger companies, usually there's a proctor at the door, so you're not, necessarily bothering the people that are in charge. Again, just like any sort of regular audition advice, people want to see you succeed, and people in this business are generally nice, so don't be afraid to do that, and that's the time that it's best to do that. I think that's kind of my monologue for the evening, so I definitely want to open it up for your questions.
Well, I'm happy to have one that's on the top of my mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much, Adrienne. That was marvelous. So I'm not a singer myself, but pretty much all of my friends are singers, including many of you. Yeah. And so I feel like I've been there for a lot of, I feel like there's this frustration point with a lot of singers I know who it's like kind of a chicken or egg.
Yeah.
I can't get this great gig because I don't have an agent, and I can't get the agent because I don't have the great gig.
Yeah.
So it's sort of I guess my question is it worth sort of doing sort of those stepping stones, like the Mass Opera, Boston Opera Collaborative, sort of, at least in the Boston area, sort of companies, is it worth having a lot of those on the resume? Is that a good thing for a manager to see, or is it sort of we just want to see that you've done really prestigious, high-level things?
It depends on who the manager is, and so I'll maybe answer this indirectly. City Lyric Opera in New York is a similar. It's not city opera. It's new. I think I think it formed before the pandemic. But anyway, it's a small company that performs at the Sheen Center with a small budget, with orchestra. But it's really not dissimilar from a lot of the companies in Boston. And I went to support my conductor client, who was the artistic director of it, and she, cast a bunch of young early career singers in Traviata. So we have a Dermot who's, 26 and not 54. And I went, and he was absolutely fantastic, and he's unmanaged, and I just was like, oh my gosh, file him away for later. And then, again, so much of this is about luck, but the next day, we got an inquiry from Hawaii Opera Theater looking for to cast an all-Asian bohème in Waikiki. And do we have any, Chouinards that might be appropriate for that on the roster? And I was like, what? I just heard this kid. And that's because he was doing a role that he wanted to do with a small company. So, working is good, and so you should work, and you never know who's going to see you work. And that's a story of how we got him the gig, and he probably will end up on the roster that way. Another thing I think that people don't think about a lot is those companies are great to get roles on your resume that some larger resident artist programs are doing. So we can talk about yaps, and the summer yaps are kind of whatever. There's maybe not that many that are worth all the fuss, but I actually think that year-long resident artist programs and, programs that pay you a basically living wage to come to, Des Moines or wherever it is to be, to cover and do roles, like the Ryan Opera Center, Wolf Trap, Washington National, those are some ones that come to mind. Those are places that are going to look at, okay, this person spent 6 years in Boston, racking up all of these roles and coaching these roles that we need, young artists to do at these programs. The agents are then going to actually come to those programs and hunt for you. So I think there's a little bit of a common misconception that it's and I did this for years, sort of in the smaller pond, hands-on directing opportunities, sort of waiting for someone to notice me. Sometimes it'll happen like it did with, that kid that I was talking about in City Lyric, but more often you'll be positioning yourself just to take the next step yourself, and then agents will be, coming to those things. There just aren't, speaking about Boston in particular, I think Miguel Rodriguez, lives here. He splits his time between here and New York with Athlone artists, but it's more common that you might get seen by an agent, either not necessarily in New York, because actually there aren't that many small companies in New York, which is kind of weird. It's different than Boston, and I miss the small company atmosphere here. But if you're somewhere like Des Moines or Chicago or a place like that, where an agent is probably traveling to see a headliner artist, and then there you are in the young artist cast, that's really useful, so that they can actually see you perform. And crashing auditions is also part of this too. It's just sort of taking that leap of faith, and so many artists on our roster do not live in New York. I'm absolutely not saying you must live in New York 365 days a year, because it's really terrible and expensive. But I would recommend, if you're really serious about sort of upping your echelon, getting an Airbnb for a couple of weeks, especially if you can work remotely, which is more common post-pandemic. And being able to go to those auditions for the resident artist programs and for the sort of young artists. And I'll say our quote unquote adult artists are getting frustrated because so many companies are casting so many roles with young artists. So it's actually a great time to be at that level, and there's a little bit more, thankfully, scrutiny about what these people are getting paid and what the living conditions are like for these people than there was 5 years ago. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's going to be my question.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for someone that's a little bit older in their career,
Yeah.
that's not a young artist,
Yeah.
but that is kind of sort of on an upward trajectory, and what advice would you have for that?
Yeah, so I know Fred pretty well, so I would say, you should definitely try your hand at going to New York and in audition season, and sort of trying to get in the door for some of these companies I'll have to email you a more complete list later, but Opera on the James, Chautauqua, Wolf Trap, these places that are kind of mid-plus level, but cast a lot of their roles with resident artists, or any kind of there's a lot of studio artists, a lot of the Filene studio artists at Wolf Trap are not young, but they're tend to be under 40. And at a certain level in their career. I would also say mobilize your connections as much as you can, and I should be getting email updates from you every 4 to 6 months, and probably some other people should too, and writing to conductors and being hey, I just came off of Omar, it was a great experience, here's what I have coming up, here's, some things that I would love to do, please keep me in mind. You really kind of have to harangue people. We call it at the office haracking, kind of combination of haranguing and attacking, I don't know. But just really staying prominent in their minds, and being, being upfront to be I feel like I'm in a really great place, but I don't want to plateau here, can you help me?
Yeah.
Think of me for things, connect me for things, yeah.
I'm actually going to be in New York in the fall, so
oh, good.
That works out.
Yeah. Yes. Hi.
So I wrote down a few questions throughout, but I'm just gonna ask one for the sake of everybody else's questions.
You can ask too.
But can you describe more what you mean about crashing auditions? Is that
Yeah, so oftentimes it's hard to get a slot if you're not managed, or if they only have 25 open slots or whatever on App Tracker, and you don't get one of them. So I mean, finding out, usually it's public knowledge where and when the audition is taking place, assuming it's they're casting for things that you would be appropriate for. And it's not like a equity cattle call where you have to get there at 5 a.m. or whatever, because you never know when they're going to have an open spot. But basically, I would go toward the beginning of the span, which luckily, because we're opera singers, is usually not before 10 a.m. Introduce yourself to the proctor and just say I'd love to be considered for Susanna. Can you I'll be around. I'm getting lunch. I'm working in the lobby. Can you let me know if there are any cancellations, and can you fit me in? and here's my materials. And then hopefully they will go in and run them into the people in charge, and they'll take a look, and if there's a space, usually they wanna fill it. They don't wanna be sitting there, so, does that help?
Yeah, it definitely helps. Is that even, because there are some cases where you get an email that we really loved you, but we didn't have enough time to like fit you in? Or is that for an email where like we really loved you, but we don't like, or like more like a PFO? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Because I'm trying to read.
I think it would be the first thing you
Yeah.
said, not the BFO. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if, so I like, keep in touch with us, you know,
Yeah.
maybe next year kind of thing. You can show persistence there by showing up, or if it's something that you didn't even have on your radar, but you heard about through a colleague or something, that's fine, yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. I send a lot of cold emails myself, but a lot of the time they don't get answered.
Oh yeah, me too. Listen, I sent 115 emails to symphony orchestras on Thursday, and I got one reply. But I might land a job for Sydney. That's one reply out of 115.
Amazing. So I guess the question is it just persistence? You just keep doing it? You just hope for that one email
Yeah,
back?
you keep doing it, and you do it on a schedule because you never know when you're going to catch someone. You know, I think if you're getting like 0% response rate, you know, again, I usually get about a 2% response rate to cold emails. But you also don't know, like, just because someone's not responding doesn't mean they're not thinking about you, and they might file it away and think about you later. You know, you could say, okay, I'm gonna work with this list, you know, because I'm constantly like updating, there's a lot of turnover, you know, and I'm constantly updating my lists and sort of going through and making sure that I have the right contact at the right organization. So you could say, like, I'm gonna try this for, you know, every 3 months, 3 times, and if I still get, you know, a 0% response rate, then I'm gonna, you know, maybe try to broaden my search or go back, or maybe I pick up the phone and call sometimes and say, you know, I'm trying to, like, I'm probably gonna have to pick up the phone when I do that Grapes of Wrath research for the other client. I'm trying to get in touch with somebody who makes casting decisions for X. Can you give me an email? Can I send you an email and you forward it? You know, an executive assistant to an artistic director, or, you know, usually they don't have them, but an executive assistant to, like, you know, the management suite is usually somebody who's going to be nice to you and take a message and forward something. I've had that happen. Yeah.
I know you all have way more questions than this.
Well, they might sink in later. So.
Cynthia, do you have another one?
I mean, yeah.
Go for it.
So, let me see. Does it matter where your manager is based?
I think because the majority of auditions are in New York, especially if you're not based in New York, it's helpful if your manager is based there. Because they're gonna, part of the reasons that we go to auditions with clients is not just to like spy on them, but also to keep the relationships with the companies alive, because when we're dealing with 36 regional companies that are just email boxes for the majority of the year during audition season, they all come to New York and we can go and actually shake hands and meet them as people. So if your manager is not able to do that, I would worry about that. Unless it's London, apparently, which is all fancy. Yes, Catherine.
This is probably more of a question for therapist manager.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for introverts who are not great at self-promotion?
Well, I don't think that digital promotion has anything to do with being an introvert or not. You know, we're not asking you to go to an event at a gallery like this and walk up to artistic directors and introduce yourself. You know, that's scary. But like, there's so many like YouTube tutorials these days on social media management, and there's Canva, which is so helpful. I love Canva. And you can sort of just treat it, like try to get some distance, I guess, between like yourself and your singer self. you know, that's part of why we get these fancy headshots, and, you know, and people have business, Instagrams and business Facebooks, because, you know, they wanna have a separate identity from the identity that's constantly getting pushed out there. So I would consider doing that and just sort of look at self-promotion as like part of the job, and not like you, Catherine, necessarily like putting yourself on the line, but it's like a persona or a character or something like that. So I would say, like, actually it's a great time to be an introvert who needs to network. You don't wanna have been that in like 1988 when you had to have a Rolodex and pick up the phone and make cold calls are way worse than cold emails, right? You don't wanna do that. And you don't wanna have to constantly be going to events and shaking hands and whatnot. And so we now live in a society where actually you can do it all from behind a closed door, so I would take advantage of that, yeah. And there are people who, like, I don't know if you guys remember Joanna Pope, who used to live here. She lives in New York now, and she does social media management for singers for a pretty reasonable rate. So again, if you really hate doing it, there are people that will do it for you, but you can also just kind of look at those examples of folks who do it really well. Again, there's tons of YouTube tutorials and stuff, and it's a great time to sort of build a persona in that way. It's not just like I have a client, John Risen, who has a bajillion Instagram followers, because that's what he did with his pandemic, basically. And, you know, regional opera companies are not hiring him because he has a bajillion Instagram followers, but he's making friends in the industry because he's active on Instagram who are recommending him for things, basically. So he's literally building a network for himself, yeah. Yeah.
Do you still pay your team if you go out and get the gig yourself versus if they
That's a
pay
great
you?
question, yeah. So it depends, but in the atmospheres where I've worked, generally, yes, because you want your team to service the engagement. So if you're not paying your 10%, which, by the way, I should say that because it's not obvious, but generally opera commissions at 10% and concert commissions at 15%. So if it's something like you really want to keep it off the books, that's fine, but we won't be, you know, dealing with your travel and housing, and if there's an issue, it sort of gets messy down the line if you need us to come in later. And if you're doing that too much, then you're probably with the wrong manager, because you're having this whole like side career that they don't know about, so they can't really advise you in a whole way. But no, there's not really like, in a managerial contract, it doesn't say like, you do not owe us the 10% if you land the gig yourself, because again, it's a partnership, so we're gonna land some for you and you're gonna land some for us, basically.
And is that something that could erode trust if
Oh,
the
yeah.
agent finds out that the singer is not telling them about gigs that
I
they've booked?
think so, yeah.
Kind of a follow-up on
Yeah.
the question about versatility, and
Yeah.
what would you say would be the best way to approach talking about your versatility if, say, you come out of a graduate program, or say you do a young artist program that's doing more musical theater, or and not as much opera, and you kind of have this array of things. How do you suggest talking about that with management?
We want to know sort of what you like singing the most, and it doesn't have to be like which category, but it can be like, you know, I really like singing this in opera, and I really like singing this in musical theater, and I think that I excel at these things, you know, for different reasons in different ways. And you want to back up your versatility with materials that back that up. So if you say, you know, I'm a musical theater singer and an opera singer, and you want to consult with a musical theater coach or somebody that's going to be able to like give you advice on what to self-tape and how to self-tape it, and, you know, have those really strong sort of facets like available for our evaluation, you know, on your website, basically. Now is like the most perfect time to be a versatile singer. Like at UIA, we have the film, TV, and Broadway fields, and so, you know, it's the same thing. Like, you know, we want to know what you like to sing and what you're booking, you know, in upcoming seasons in those arenas. And like, if somebody came to UIA with bookings in all of those different categories, we wouldn't really care how disparate they are, as long as they have the materials that we can use to market them in those fields. So I don't know, does that kind of answer your question?
I think so. I've done like a lot, like art song and
Yeah.
concert rep and opera rep, so I'm just thinking about being marketable to a manager and kind of addressing that type of marketability. Maybe some suggestions of what would be helpful
You
for
could
you.
speak to, your knowledge of the business that, versatility is at a premium right now, and that, you learn music really well and quickly, no matter what it is, and, that you can be, hired in a number of different contexts, and, speak to the ways that the ways in which you're marketable in each category sort of speak to each other, so that it brings it back to being sort of a whole artist in one person. Yeah.
Sorry.
No problem.
Could I just kind of piggyback off the versatility
Yeah.
point they made, particularly because the thing that I do outside of opera is still kind of connected to opera. I work in EDI with Dallas Opera. I do a ton of independent contractor work for Opera America, Utah Opera, and typically when they contact me, they always ask questions about like Latinx representation and programming and that kind of stuff. And I think I've done something for BSR. Yes, I've done something
I think in
for
the past
BSR as
you
well.
Yeah.
But is that something that you would include in
Yeah.
the press kit, or is that not something is that something because it doesn't involve singing?
In your bio, yeah, I would, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah, especially now, today, post-COVID, post everything that happened over the pandemic, management firms are trying to demonstrate their commitment to those same principles. So it's something that we think about, for sure, or it should be, yeah. Yeah,
Any thoughts on the cold emailing,
yeah.
on what's too much to send as far as recordings? So assuming you were talking about going to people's websites, I'm thinking, well, everybody's busy. If they happen to open my email,
For sure.
is it
That's a good question.
Two
videos,
things,
yeah,
two-
two
yeah.
contrasting videos, that's a
Got
good
it.
question, yeah, and no more than like this much
2 minutes,
text.
3 minutes each,
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, well, it doesn't matter necessarily how long they are, because you have to know probably people will skip to the money notes. Often people will skip to the money notes, so I wouldn't worry so much about the length of the videos, except for it's a technology thing and what's easy to open, but, yeah, and short text with lots of hyperlinks, to your website, and, just make it pretty digestible in that way. And also a call to action is helpful, let me know if you would like to discuss this further, I will be in your area on this day, I will follow up, sort of make it dynamic in that way.
Also, so there's the live, do you want like ideally one live performance, one recorded performance? Any
Personally, it
preference?
doesn't matter to me.
You just wanna hear
just
the
what
voice.
represents
Got
me the
it.
best, yeah, which I would think would be a studio recording,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
If you really want to focus on symphony and oratorio, it's really helpful to have a recording with orchestra, if you can. I find that's less prevalent with opera, for some reason, because they're just like, we just want to hear you live, and see how it rings in the space. Yeah.
Is it too contrasting if you do something that's traditionally theater, but you sing it in a very operatic style? Like, I do Bring Him Home all the time, and I
Yeah.
sing it like an opera singer.
Yep.
So when I present it, they hear, oh, opera singer, they don't hear Broadway. So is that something that like is okay if I was to audition for it, or send a video in? Because I have tons of videos of me singing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to say something else about that. Yeah.
One
Oh,
day.
this thing about, because this is just a general nugget, but I'm hearing a lot from colleagues these days about like audition packages that are sort of very grad school, because we feel like it has to be the big five and all the languages, but like part of specializing and showing like who you are as an artist is maybe you specialize in French rep, so you're gonna have 2 French pieces, 2 French arias and a French song and an English piece, and a Mozart, or no Mozart, people are like, I gotta have a Mozart. And, so I think like taking that step to sort of grow up your package a little bit, so that it's not just like as cookie cutter as it was when you were auditioning for grad schools or other similar things. Yes?
On that same topic, what about non-standard rep?
Yeah, I think if you send non-standard rep, it's good to also send a standard rep piece, so that people have a metric, like a commonly known metric to evaluate you against, but I think that sending non-standard rep, especially today, is really good. And it has happened several times, to positive effect in my experience. Yeah.
So kind of jumping back to the snake eating its own tail of like, you have to get the great gig to get the agent to notice you, but you can't get the great gig without an agent to get you in through the door. I feel like a lot of singers have this narrative in their heads of, okay, I get out of grad school, I do the big yap, the agent notices me.
That's it.
What kind of credits would management want to look at outside of the yap circuit, like at the Santa Fe, that kind of thing?
So mid-level companies like, I'm gonna totally blank on all of them, but like, you know, places like Knoxville, Nashville, there's a ton of companies in Florida. Like if you wanted to try to go down and live in Florida and get a bunch of regional credits down there, that would be a great idea, because there's about 12 companies within driving distance, so like Sarasota, I know that's like yeah too, but like St. Pete's, Saratoga, Chautauqua, yeah, those kinds of levels of things. But doing roles at smaller houses, particularly, like I think sometimes a trap that we can fall into when we're a big fish in a small pond is to do a bunch of roles in small companies that we would never get considered for in larger companies, and then our resume gets filled with stuff that like people aren't going to take a chance on us for. So looking for opportunities in your smaller companies to advocate for rep to be done or audition for rep that those kinds of mid-sized companies would actually cast you in, because it's age appropriate, or it's a medium-sized role, or it's Confirmario plus, because we don't want to have a situation where we're looking at a resume of all Rodolfo's as a mid-level plus company and be like, well, I would never cast him as Rodolfo, because you know, that's a role for a different level of singer, but like a role like Chonard is totally different, and that's the good kind of role to try to get on your resume in smaller houses. Yeah, and I mean, it sounds exhausting just talking about it, all this travel, but opera is really a regional business. You know, it's really not, the fact that auditions still take place in New York is just like whatever, it's decades of tradition that make that happen, and it's just like, they have to be somewhere, like one place, but it's really not, you know, I say this to people all the time, like people think of New York as, you know, for theater, it's like, gotta go to New York, you know, do those Broadway auditions, do those EPAs, whatever, but it's really not the case with our field. It's so national and so regional, and like the Opera America conference is coming up, and that's a confluence of like everybody in the country coming together, and they're from everywhere, and that's where the opportunities are, is scattered. So it can be good to ride that train for a while, and then after you've sort of had your fill of that, maybe you can get a cushy teaching job and sort of settle down somewhere and have more of a community. But yeah, I want to recognize that, you know, that can be hard, but especially when you're courting an agent, you know, they do want to see some national work at certain mid-level companies. Opera on the James, what are other things? And those sort of keep coming to me. Intermountain Opera Bozeman is run by Michael Saker, who is a Boston alum as well. Chicago Opera Theater, also run by Lydia Yankovskaya, these kinds of places. Yeah.
When you were going through the email that should be sent to managers, I missed exactly what should be on there. You said clear and concise, what I admire about the agency, keep short, but then you said something else.
What do you have upcoming? And like make it really clear, so like not just in your resume, but like in your resume you can do like that upcoming section specifically for managers, but then also in the body of the email. Like even when I send something about, you know, an artist that I'm pushing to a company, it's basically like, who are they, what have they done recently, what do they have upcoming, so like recent highlights, upcoming highlights, things that are bulleted and like easy to digest like that, even if they don't open the attachment. just to get who you are and what's on your schedule. Yeah.
When do you think it's okay to start dropping things off of your resume? Like I don't have anything on school
Oh,
anymore,
yeah.
but I have some roles with some local.
I say keep it to the last 5 years unless it's a really, really representative role.
Okay.
And then one that you still sing and would want to be considered to sing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so about 16, 17 would be the farthest back that I would go.
Okay. I asked for
Yeah.
That's what I said.
Would you recommend
Like,
having
I was
for concert rep versus opera rep? And
Yes.
I guess similar, like how many concert items?
Yep, yeah, I would recommend, if not having different resumes, like rearranging your columns. So if you're going for a firm or an opportunity that is concert focused, leading with that. But like I remember, I met with a singer, I did a consultation with somebody who was like, I have all these concert credits, but I really wanna be singing more opera. And I told her like her website was very concert-y, like it was just, you know, you just get the feeling like it's not really an opera website. And in a way, like, if she has a goal to be singing the stuff that she's not getting hired to do the most right now, she should be presenting herself as the opposite of who she currently is, because that's who she wants to be. So like her resume had oratorio at the top, and I was like, just, you know, switch the opera and put it up there. And yeah, if you have a huge swath of gigs where you can't decide what to keep on and what to leave off, then you can investigate having the different resumes. Particularly with musical theater, it's a whole different like way that you're supposed to have a resume. So you should definitely have a separate musical theater resume if you have. And they can be really short too. Like I notice even like at grad school showcases, so they're technically at the beginning of their careers, but like it's maybe 5 credits and then like everybody that you've ever studied with in your entire life, and then special skills. So it's like this much, you know, actual text, whereas with the opera resumes, I feel like we're often trying to cram them all on to one page. Yeah.
This is your last one.
So, in terms of your package, I hope it's okay that I went back to the package part, but how of the arias, should you have one aria that shows where your voice is going, or should pretty much your entire package be what you're hireable for now, where your voice is now?
It depends on the context. Generally speaking, I would say what you're hireable for now and what you could sing if you roll out of bed. Like I definitely subscribe to that, like don't bring the practice room reach into the audition, but I have seen some folks who came into consultations or sort of low pressure, get to know you sort of agent situations where they'll have a separate section of their rep list that says rep in development. And we might ask to hear it or hear a little bit because it's a good way to like get to know those things, but like I wouldn't bring, like if you're crashing an audition, you gotta bring like the stuff that's really solid and shows who you are now. Because we don't wanna watch you labor through something. We'd rather hear you talk about, like, sing something really well, and then we'll be like, wow, like, you know, seems like Mozart's really working for you, or have you, you know, do you sing Mozart? What do you sing? What are your thoughts on this? Like, we can talk about it. We don't need to hear necessarily your work in the audition context to know, like, where the voice is going. We can ask. Yeah.
Just curious, when you said the website didn't look opera-y,
Oh,
can you
yeah.
expand
Yeah,
on
just
that?
like, it was very sort of like, serviceable, like not in any way glamorous or performative. It was sort of like, here's some non-video audio recordings of oratorio and some pictures that didn't necessarily really look like performer pictures. Sort of, it was like informative, but not sort of like captivating and like telling the story of the artist. Yeah.
I have a question about
Yeah.
resumes, I guess, as well. To you, is it, first of all, are you an advocate for the little asterisk that says canceled due to COVID-19?
Yeah.
That's good? Okay.
Yeah, especially if it's like an indicative role or like what would have been a big role premiere or a premiere somewhere that, you know, you worked really hard to get hired.
Okay.
Especially if you're going in to talk to an agent. Yeah, share
Sure.
those things.
It may eventually fade.
Yes.
But for now, still good.
Well, you hopefully will get, you know, 6
Yeah.
years later, you'll finally get that Figaro and you can take the old one off.
Right. and then going along with that, do you like to see, like, if a singer does a lot of cover work,
Yep.
Is it great to see all of those, or maybe like limit how many covers?
If they do like a lot, I don't know that I need to see all of them, but I have not seen a resume recently where I was like, gotta get rid of some of this cover work. Like, it's usually like, I usually see like 4 or 5. And again, again, it should be representative stuff and like stuff that you would, it's literally showing, I learned the role, I know the role, I'd like to be cast in it. Ensemble stuff, I would say, unless it's like the Met, leave it off. Yeah. Even if it is the Met, I don't know, people have different opinions on that, but yeah, if you're going in for a soloist opportunity, if you're going in for an ensemble opportunity, then put it on.
I guess in this town, like if you've been in the BLO chorus, would you think that doesn't necessarily belong?
I think for some smaller Boston organizations, it can signal that you're a good musician, and talk about the size of the voice in a sort of intramural way. But I wouldn't like if you were going to go in and meet with Miguel and he was going to hear you somewhere here. I would not put it on the resume.
Good to know.
But you could mention it, like, in conversation. But he doesn't want to, he wants to see the principal roles, yeah.
Anyone else? Any other juicy questions? Of course.
I know there's a lot of ACMA houses and there's some that are not. Like, what is your preference? Like, do you prefer all of your singers to be a part of the ACMA just because when you're going to ACMA house, it was just...
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm still learning about AGMA a little bit, but yeah, I mean, like, I'm trying to think. I don't know the percentage of like the singers on the roster that are a part of AGMA versus not. I would say it's more common for like stage directors. Stage directors sort of turn into a must join because they tend to just like work more frequently at like the bigger houses, but I would say probably like a quarter of our roster probably are not ACMA members, and it hasn't caused a problem because they work at some of like the much smaller houses throughout the country. Yeah, we don't really, it's not in the managerial agreement, and we don't have like when we have like a get to know you Zoom, it doesn't tend to come up. Yeah.
Do you think there's an age limit for singing management?
No, but it depends on who you are, what your voice part is, what you're marketable for at that age. So like, we could absolutely sign a Marcellina. If we didn't have Marcellinas, we already have 3 Marcellinas on the roster. But no, there's no age limit for that as long as the singer knows what they should be singing and what they're marketable to be singing at that age. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you talk about sometimes like, oh, we have 3 Marcellinas on the roster. It seems like there's sort of this very specific way that you'll kind of like identify a singer based on like a Mozart or Puccini role that they might do. Do you feel like, as the opera industry sort of shifts in maybe a little bit more of a, like the Met's doing more contemporary operas and things like that?
Yeah, I think that it is shifting a little bit. And usually it's like a singer who has made their bread and butter doing a certain role that is in the classic lexicon, but maybe is branching out more now. But I think like the contemporary rep singer is also like now a category. And so it's not necessarily a role in the contemporary rep canon, but it's just like singing that new rep and singing it really well and learning it well.
So you would sort of say, sorry, I'm kind of taking over. I was so excited about this. So it's sort of a good idea for a singer to kind of market themselves specifically as being a contemporary rep singer, rather than saying, oh, I sing Fiordaligi and I really like contemporary rep.
It depends on the firm and who is already on the roster. So yeah, it's a little reductive to say like we have all these Marcellinas, but like you have to look and see, just like in terms of what you like. It's like maybe there's 3 character mezzos on the roster, but they don't do contemporary work, and you're like, I'm a character mezzo and I do contemporary work, so that's my edge.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I think we have a few minutes left if anyone has any other burning questions. You've
You can
answered.
find me on the social medias at Lawfactotum. If you have questions later, that's
I
fine.
think you've addressed every possible question that could be asked.
Yeah.
We're done. We've solved it. Well, thank you again so much, Adrienne. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for spending your Friday night with me. It's really an honor. So please connect with me on social media and follow UIA Talent as well. And
if anyone thinks of any questions that they didn't get to ask
you
tonight,
can
email
me or message me Lawfactotum on Instagram. It's
Wonderful.
me.
Very generous of you. Thank you so much.
And I'm here for you. So
Before we head out, I'm going to be grandpa. We need to take some group pictures.
yes.